Welcome to Unity of Springfield Adult Education and World Religions class. Today, my name is John Braucher. I'm very glad to be with you this Halloween morning to talk about a book, Gandhi, the Autobiography. And the subtitle, which is really what I'm very much interested in, is the story of my experiments of truth. And I've read his book before, and I actually have talked about some of this before, but I really felt like there was a need to do an update. In the last several years, I've been more focused on really some of the Abraham Hicks approaches to things, as well as just unity principles. And as I was rereading Gandhi's autobiography, I really have starting to take a different edge and gleaning more out of it. So I wanted to share some of that today, and hopefully have some discussion about that as well. So let's start, and welcome to those of you who are at home through live streaming. Really appreciate you checking out our educational pieces. And let's take a couple of minutes and just check in with headquarters. Let go of thoughts and beliefs that are resisting who we really are. Knowing that we are an aspect of source energy, beloved and worthy of our greatest desires. Okay, so what we're going to start off, I kind of split this up into a couple of portions. The first part where I'm going to kind of go over a brief timeline of the life of Gandhi. And then we're going to talk some about his the concepts that were very near and dear to him in terms of how he was able to approach making great social change during his lifetime and relatively young part of his lifetime. And then talk about some of those concepts, how they match up today. Of course, he died in 45, so it's been quite a long time. But how does some of that continue to match up with unity principles, new thought, thinking, and then kind of bring that forward and see what we can do with that. So Gandhi was born October 2nd, 1869. And he married in 1882. He was 13 years old. Gandhi had it. His parents did an arranged marriage for him. So he didn't really have much of a choice in the matter. He was born in Porbandar, India, and some of his life issues that occurred for him was that in 1885 his father died, and also in 1885 his wife had their first baby, who only lived for a few days. So he had a real intense double grief. He also was very upset because he had been caregiving for his father during a lengthy illness, and he wasn't able to be there when he actually died. So that really struck him quite a bit. In 1888, soon after his first child was born, Gandhi moved to England, went to England to study, to become a barrister or an attorney. And and at that time, is actually the first baby that survived between he and his wife was born. And he left to go to England after being married for 6 years to his wife Kasturba, and she stayed behind in India and took care of his baby, their baby. So here he was, 18 years old. He was an extremely shy fellow. He did not, it's funny that they had him decided that he was to become a barrister or an attorney, and he was like super shy. He didn't want to talk to anybody, and he didn't really do public speaking. He was okay around family and friends, but he was not a public speaker whatsoever early on. And so he goes off on this ship to go to England, and he'd never been out of the basic region of where he was raised. So there he goes, culture shock, trying to figure out who he is. He's a new father, and in order for him to be able to go, he had to get some support from family, and there was resistance because he was from a local religion and caste that was pretty conservative. So in order to be able to go, he had to make these vows. He had to swear off alcohol, women, and meat. Okay, so and which he was very willing to do. At that point in time, he wanted to be faithful to his wife, and he wasn't used to eating meat or drinking alcohol, because the conservative Hindu sect that they were a part of, that just fit in okay. And but they knew that the English, when he went to England, they were going to try and make a meat eater out of him. So that was kind of a big thing. His older brother, following the death of his father, was the person who bankrolled his trip to England. So he always kind of looked up to him. Also, before he left to go to England, he was excommunicated or made an outcast by his caste. So, and basically they had told him, no, you can't go to England from our caste, because we know they're just going to ruin you, you're going to lose your religion, we forbade you to go. And Gandhi just never even really thought twice about listening to them. but he was kind of surprised that they did outcast him. And so right off, he's 18 years old. His dad was kind of a worldly guy. He did local politics. He was kind of an administrator type of person in local government. And local government at that time, of course, India was a colony of England, of Great Britain. So they were sort of self-governing on a local basis. But they had to always get permission from the English for everything. So, and his dad was not overly religious. His dad also was very open to other religions. So he had a lot of friends who were Muslim and who were different Jainists and different sects of Hinduism, and he was just very open about that, and so that was something that he knew about his father, and his mother was very religious, but as often was in the times, remember he was born in 1869, and mostly what boys would do, they would follow their dad around, and that was his main teacher. So even though his mother was very important to him, his kind of lack of interest in religion and lack of information and knowledge about religion was because his father didn't really push it on him. So he believed in God, but he didn't really have a religion. He didn't really follow a religion. He wasn't following Hinduism very closely. So in England, first of all, he almost starved to death because he was not eating meat, and the rest of the English diet, if you take away the meat, is rather bland. And he's used to curry and all kinds of spices and stuff in his food, and he really had lost a lot of weight when he first went there. And so he's trying to figure out, just even how to survive. And he was trying to find vegetarian restaurants, which there were very few of. And he finally found some Christian people who were vegetarians. Of course, they also were trying to get him to Hello? We were trying to get him to become Christian. So everybody was trying to, get him to eat meat and become Christian in England, and so he was really kind of fighting that off. He didn't really have a problem with dealing with Christianity so much because he just was a very kind of matter-of-fact, like, if you can rationally convince me to be Christian, I'm open to that. So, go ahead, hit me with your best shot. Give me, talk to me about why, I should be Christian. And it never really hit with him. Of course, he also was reticent because he didn't really know the Hindu religion well. And so he kind of didn't really want to go for a different culture's religion when he didn't really know his own religion. So those were a couple of things that were holding him off. The Christian women that helped him with the vegetarianism, though, also helped him with his shyness. But they also made it difficult for him to not want to have sexual desires and stuff. So he was really struggling with that. But it was a good experience for him in that he did become a lot more comfortable around people and talking to people. Public speaking, not yet quite so much, but he did do better with that. Alcohol never seemed to really be an issue for him. He saw enough people have bad times with alcohol that he just kind of said, like, why would you do that? So he didn't really have too much of a problem with that. But during this time in England, he'd also had a lot of experiments around diet. So he did finally find, with the help of some of these people, some both books on vegetarianism as well as some people who did it. And there was actually some groups of people who would meet and they would break bread together and eat vegetarian food, because there just were not a lot of vegetarians in England, in London at this time when he was there. So they actually had, their little support groups for people who didn't eat meat. And this experience of experimenting with food and learning about diet and paying attention to like how he then felt with the changes of diet is something that's stuck with him his entire life. He continued to do different diets, and in fact used diet. He kind of fancied himself a quack of sorts. And he actually used the word quack in his autobiography, referring to himself for that he used something called hydrotherapy and also doing some things with using earth to packed on body parts, and then he also diet. Diet was a big part of this kind of folk medicine that he was working and learning about. So another group of people that he was exposed to, and he met Madame Blavatsky, who wrote about Theosophy. She was a Theosophist. And before I read his autobiography, I didn't know what a Theosophist was. But they were, back in the 1880s, they were studying religions and faith streams because they were just open to, they wanted to learn about Eastern religions, and they were very much wanted to meet him because of he was Indian and was raised in a Hindu culture. But he said, he told them, he said, I don't really know much about it, But that did help to kind of get him interested, and of course also the Christians trying to convert him also got him interested in studying more about religions. And so, and then he read Trotsky's what was his? It's not the what was Trotsky's book that he wrote that was kind of a theology, the heaven within, not heaven within, but it's the world within or something along those lines. Anyways, he read that while he was in England, and that really spurred him to learn about Hinduism as well. So he started to do some reading while he was there in England. So he finished his studies in England and passed his tests. So he was now going to be able to practice as a barrister when he returned to India. So he returns to India, and remember his dad had died a few years before he went off to school. And by the time he got back, he found out his mother had already died while he was gone in England. So he had lost both of his parents. They didn't tell him she had actually died before he took off from England to India, but they didn't want to tell him because they wanted him to be able to take his tests and do all that stuff and not be going through the grief right away. And so he comes back, and again, his mother was the very religious one. So that also, along with some of his experiences in England and the fact that his mom died, also got him a lot more interested in studying his own Hindu religion, which he continued to do. And again, they were from a very conservative Hindu sect in terms of, this being very sexually closed, diet, no alcohol, and not very boisterous, very quiet and stuff, which affected him. So he goes to India to practice law, and he just fails miserably because he can't get up and speak. They want him to come and speak in front of the Supreme Court and do this and that, and they got him these cases to do, and he just fails. He just falls flat, and he doesn't make a dime. And of course, when they find out that he can't speak in front of people, nobody wants to hire him as an attorney. So finally, a friend of his hooks him up with a job. He gets this job in South Africa, and it's good for a year. They'll pay him good money so he can start to pay back some of the family for the cost of sending him to England to get his education, and also to raise his family, because they've been supporting his family as well, his older brother. So he goes off to South Africa to practice, and for a one-year contract. And while he's in South Africa, it's an accounting case between two guys that are related. They're actually cousins, and they're both Indian. And so he was hired on because he was Indian, and they wanted to have somebody who was aware of the culture. And but there was an English attorney who was already assigned to the case. And they tell him they probably aren't going to need him, but he goes in, and anyways, he's new to it, so he studies, and he also observes law cases, and he starts to actually get more comfortable in his chosen profession while he's there. But he also experiences, like he's on a train, and he can't sit in the class. He bought a first class ticket, and because of the color of his skin, he's not allowed to sit in first class. And so he's pushed back into third class, and he doesn't handle it very well. He says no, and he complains, and he writes letters, and he causes a bit of a hubbub. And he also sees, like when he goes to third class on the train, the filth and the stench, and how crammed in everybody is in these third class, and just kind of the disrespect, and also having people not look him in the eye, people not talking to him, or both the Europeans of Dutch descent and the Europeans of English descent, having kind of different kinds of racism, but racism nonetheless, that he's really experiencing. He experienced it in India because of the colonization, but it was much different. It was more of almost a half slavery. There was also in South Africa at the time a very large indentured servants industry. So the Indians would come, and that's where a lot of the Indians in South Africa were indentured servants, and that was kind of a half slavery. And of course, the way they had apartheid, it wasn't called apartheid yet, but it was already pretty much in force. And so he also saw how they were treating the black Africans as well. And so he was pretty struck by this, but more so by the way the Indians were treated. And so he started to practice a public law, what he calls public law, which is basically social justice movements. And so he really gets into this social justice stuff, and finds that he actually can make a living doing it. Even though he does continue to practice a little bit of regular law, especially because he learned a lot about finances from that very first case that he took. He had to study and learn what bookkeeping was and accounting, and because that was the nature of that. And when he did that case, he also, rather than it being one, being the winner and one being the loser, he got them to get together and talk to it. He's found what the errors were, and he worked with them to go ahead and work together. And one of them had to pay another because of the errors that were in the accounting system and so on and so forth. And so he won the case, but he also found out that if the one cousin who was on the other side had to pay all the money right up front, he would go bankrupt. And to an Indian businessman at that time, that was like worse than death. And so he would even have to consider suicide. And so Gandhi knew this, so he said, well, let's work it out where he can make it on payments, and he can still keep his business and not have to bankrupt his business, and he can still, and of course they were related. They were really mad at each other, but he really worked hard to make this happen, and it did. And so he kind of earned a lot of respect in the Indian community because of doing this. And that kind of started his reputation. And he also really had a trouble with the fact that his profession was so antagonistic to everybody. And there was part of his heart was that he wanted people to figure things out. And he was really intense about this whole idea of truth. And he didn't like that people would be dishonest. And there's several examples in his career as an attorney where he would say, look, this is the truth, and the guy and an attorney above him would say, no, you can't share that information. That goes against our case. But he would really push for that anyways, and earned a lot of respect from other attorneys, but also from people in the social justice movement. So anyway, so he goes back to India again, and then back to South Africa, and continues doing all these social justice movements and helps people get rights, and he helps the Indians be able to continue to have businesses, because in addition to the indentured servants, there were a lot of Indian businessmen who had gone to South Africa. And that was part of the problem. When he was also there, they tried to take away their rights to have their own businesses, because they were pretty good businessmen, and some of the Europeans were getting a little scared, and a lot of the racial issues was against, they didn't want these brown-skinned people competing with them. That was just not right. So he was working on that. And his basic concepts that he has, so that's kind of his young part of his life, and then he, after he really did a lot of really cool stuff in South Africa, helped the Indians there. He didn't really help the Zulus very much, other than a couple of things that he did. There was a Boer War while he was there in South Africa, and that was between the Dutch and the English. And so he, being Indian, he felt he was part of the British Empire, even though they were lords over the Indians. He still identified with being English, and of course that's where his education was from. So he saw himself as being a British subject of sorts. And he set up he had nursed his father early on, and he really wanted to be a doctor when he was a kid, but his family told him no, he had to be a lawyer. So he set up a medical course, and he knew this doctor who helped to train these people. So he set up a medical course to to nurse people in the Boer War. And they earned this reputation of doing great work. And at first they didn't want them to, because they were Indians and they were people of color, and they didn't really want them involved. But he fought hard, and finally they were able to provide service. And some of his Indian friends would go like, "Why are you doing that? Why are you helping these people out? They're treating you unfairly." But he always had this thing that he always wanted to help people. He always wanted, and it was always love first. It was always, I want to do for others, and I want to be of service. And again, that because of that, he made lots of connections that ended up being able to be very helpful later on down his life. And in the next war that he was involved was a Zulu Rebellion, which he didn't really see as being a rebellion, but he had heard about it, and when he first heard about it, he didn't know that it wasn't really a rebellion. So he put together another group of medics, got them trained. Since they had had such a positive thing from the Boer War, they did go ahead and very quickly said, "Oh, thanks, good. We need you. This has happened really fast on us, and we weren't ready for it." So, and they helped, and basically they nursed Zulus, because none of the English or the Dutch the Europeans weren't getting injured. And a lot of what they took care of was of Zulus who had been whipped and punished and had sores that got infected. And so they were nursing these black Africans in South Africa. He didn't really know their culture or their language, and so he didn't really get all that close to them, but he did have some understanding of what their position and the way that they were treated. And then he did the same. Then he went, and after having done some social justice stuff in South Africa, which is where he came up with Satyagraha, which is his basic approach to social justice, which is coming from a position of strength and nonviolence, but firmly civil disobedience, and pushing the people in power to change without violence. But violence is just not allowed in Satyagraha. But he didn't see it as being a weakness. He saw it as being coming from a place of strength. And then he used that in India to help them get their freedom. He started off, did a piece with in the 20s with some farmers who were forced to grow crops that they couldn't make any money. And the workers, they were treated very poorly, and he helped with the workers just to get, clean latrines and food and basic needs met. And then he did a salt rebellion because they started taxing everybody for the salt. And so he helped create some, and then he also had problems where the people would get violent. They didn't understand the nonviolence, and he had to figure out how to teach this to people. But he had become very famous, and he would go on hunger strikes in order to get the people to back off from the violence, and it actually worked. So he had this Satyagraha. He had ahimsa, which is the do no harm. The fact that, he didn't want to kill an insect. And that you see that common in Buddhism and some of the Hinduism. There's just this, they don't want to hurt anybody, and they don't want to kill anybody. That was a very powerful piece behind everything that he always went with. And then as he really started to get some power in the social justice movement, he started to practice Brahmacaria, which is pure conduct, sexual chastity. And he did that because he really felt like that was something that would give him power in order to walk the talk and be very strong at what he did. So, I've been reading this, and I've been going through the Abraham Hicks and also through Unity Principles, and I was, I've got this, he's such an esteemed person, and I'm trying to make sense of, well, how does this fit? This Brahmacaria and this, withholding things from ourselves and so on and so forth. And so what I kind of came up with is that he needed to have a discipline, a spiritual discipline. And of course, he was born in 1869, so he never heard of Abraham Hicks. He never heard of a lot of the people that we have were exposed to, and who were the forefathers of the movements that we're a part of. But what I do like about what he did is that he experimented. See, he had this idea that, I'm going to try doing things with diet. I'm going to try doing things. I'm going to learn about my religion, the source of my people. I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try that. And he didn't really fit in very well with a lot of the Hindus. He really got a lot of the Hindus mad at him. For one thing, he did not believe in the whole thing of untouchables. One of the things that he had done in India was, because of his experiences in South Africa, he had done a lot of hygiene stuff, and his interest in health and nursing and medical stuff. He had done a lot of hygiene stuff. He had helped prevent disease from the rats. There was a plague that went on in South Africa, and he helped to stop it because of he knew he had hygiene practices and things in place that he was able to teach, and he implemented it before the local governments could. I mean, they found out and they saw what he did, and boy, that really helped him in his social justice movements because he had gotten so much respect for that. Anyways, it's his study of health, of just what can impact people, and what impacted himself. He was anything he really at first applied to himself. So he tried the diet, and he didn't always see it as restrictive. And so, you can't eat meat, but it's like, no, I'm eating stuff that's good for me, and I'm going to be more healthy, and he had these beliefs, and that were very powerful.
So how long did he live?
He lived to be, 69. He was in his 70s, but he was shot to death. He was not sick. He was not dying when he died because he was politically too out there for a lot of people. And really, what at his time of his death, he wanted a unified India. Instead of it being Pakistan and India, he wanted the whole subcontinent to be all one country, and he wanted Muslims to be a part of the government with the Hindus. But neither the Hindus nor a lot of the Muslims trusted each other, and it was a Hindu that was anti-Muslim Hindu who assassinated him because of his being very open to other religions. Was the reason that he was assassinated. They found that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, guy just came up and shot him in the head. So he believed that by being disciplined, that he could develop power over himself first, but then that would also, when other people could see, the self-discipline and the love, because a part of that was he was always trying to do stuff to help other people. And that was in good stead. So even his enemies couldn't help but like him because because he loved them, and he would look out for them and he tried to help them. And in a situation where he knew that they were harming people that he was representing, he would always look out for the other person that was on the other side. And he did that because he had this non-judgmental stance thing. He was in touch with this unconditional love. And he didn't know how to not treat everybody that way. And it was powerful. They'd never met anybody like that before. And so that was the power of his social justice movement, was that he had that ability to, even though there was something he was trying to correct, he wouldn't see the other person as just being the bad guy. He would see the other person as being just like him, and would treat him with such kindness that they let him get away with things that normally they wouldn't let people get away with. Now, he spent time in jail, but they were always letting him out. He hardly ever did his whole term because he was in constant communication with people, and he had so much good press and good relationships with so many people. People would write in his behalf and get him out, or all kinds of things. Or people would have a change of heart. People in power would have a change of heart. They would be mad at him, and then they would find out all these things he did to help them, and then they would have a change of heart and let him free. Yes.
I can see where Unity's principles fall really into Gandhi. You know, his diet, vegetarian, forgiveness, unconditional love, really, really follows a lot of his principles.
Yes. I mean, he grew up, well, okay, Queen Victoria was the Queen of England when he was growing up. So they had a very oppressive sexual stuff that was part of that, but beyond that, he just, yes, I think that had he not been born Hindu, in a Hindu family, in the Hindu culture, and he had been exposed to the group of the Theosophists, I think that, you know, a lot of the Theosophists were kind of forerunners to New Thought movement, New Thought Christianity, and I think that he very well might have been, because it wasn't just Christianity too. It was an amalgamation of world religions and thoughts about God. That I think, yeah, it was right there. It was very close, and I think he was true to himself. The whole thing was his whole life was this kind of scientific method exploration of trying experiments with diet, with people, with love, with relationships, with any health, that all led to him being able to be who he really was, finding himself, finding his own sense of Hinduism. He was the one that made it illegal in India about the untouchables. Now, and also the caste system, which still exists today, the way that even though, you know, slavery and racism is no longer in the United States anymore, legally, but yet it's still, you know, there's cultures take generations and generations to change, so that still exists in India to this day. If you're not in a right caste, or if you try to do things that your caste doesn't believe in, people will reach out and touch you, whether you want them to or not. Anyways, that was what I just felt was really powerful from Gandhi, was the fact that, and that fits in more with, I think, New Thought, is that we really, everybody goes through this self-exploration. We go through these experiments, if you will. We spend time in meditation to get to know. We're looking for the evidence. But we also have the faith, which he always had. He always believed there was something bigger than himself. He didn't think he knew what it was or what, which religion was right or anything. And he never really pushed one or the other. He, again, like his father, he always had Muslim friends. He always wanted the Muslim folks to be a part of India, and as well as the Jainis and Sikhs and other religions that were part of India. He always felt that we were all Indians, we're all part of the brotherhood on the subcontinent. But he was always pushing to learn more for himself, and wanted other people to also have to know more about what was good, what was, and how we can treat each other in a non-judgmental way. Any thoughts from anybody? Well, let's close with just a short meditation. Let us remember that social justice, personal justice, lies in our being who we are without resistance, in caring about those around us, in caring about ourselves. In continuing to learn by observing our experiments in life. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
I love it. I learned some new stuff today, and I think that's so awesome. Next week, we will have Mary Hilsaback-Huber teaching in the New Thought World Religion class. She's presenting on work as a spiritual practice. And then Sunday, we will have Sue Baggett's Day back, and she's going to be talking about Thanksgiving. Also, don't forget, clocks fall back next Sunday. And then November 12th at 7 o'clock, we're going to have our talent show. Please join us. Thank you.